A pub in the Cotswolds is booked solid until March. Not for the beef, not for the beer. Because of a council. Back in 2019, West Oxfordshire District Council decided a struggling farmer needed a lesson. A sourcing radius. A shed they wouldn't let him touch. 3 years of it, meeting after meeting. But here's the thing nobody on that committee saw coming. Every objection they wrote actually ended up in the show. On Amazon, in front of millions who genuinely never thought about planning law in their lives. To see it for themselves. The committee thought they were stopping something. What they actually built was the most oversubscribed pub in England. And they're the reason it got that big. Start before any of this. Before Amazon. Before the tractor jokes. Before anyone in Chipping Norton had a clue their village was about to become somewhere people drove to on purpose. This pub, the Farmer's Dog, on a road most people only ever passed, was for years exactly what England's lost hundreds of. Not derelict, not disgraced, just tired. Carpet that had seen better decades. A specials board that hadn't changed with any real conviction since the last landlord bothered to care. It had regulars, the way every pub has regulars, the same 3 men on the same 3 stools. And they'd sit there till they couldn't, but nobody knew was coming in. It wasn't somewhere you set out for, it was somewhere you ended up. That's the quiet tragedy of the English country pub, and there's nothing dramatic about it. Nobody forecloses on a place like this. It just fades. Tuesday lunch thins out. Sunday roast bookings drop from 12 tables to 6. One winter, the boiler goes, and the numbers don't quite work to fix it properly, so it gets patched instead. You can watch a building do this for a decade before anyone says the word out loud. Then in walks a man who'd already turned a failing 1,000-acre farm into something Amazon was paying good money to film. Clarkson bought the pub, and here's the detail that tells you everything about what he was actually planning. Before a single sausage roll had gone out under his ownership, he built a car park for 360 cars. Sit with that number a second. You don't build 360 spaces for the darts team and Thursday quiz night. You build that many when you already know, because you've watched it happen at the farm shop, that people will drive 2 hours for the privilege of queuing. He wasn't renovating a pub, he was building infrastructure for a pilgrimage that hadn't started yet. That's exactly the moment the council clocked what he was up to. Because in English planning law, ambition is the first thing anyone notices, and it's rarely welcomed with open arms. Worth being fair here, because most retellings of this get lazy. West Oxfordshire District Council weren't villains twirling a moustache. They were doing by the book what a planning authority is meant to do. Protect an area of outstanding natural beauty. Manage traffic on lanes never built for coach parties. Deal with neighbours who didn't sign up to live next door to a film set. That's the official version. And it's not wrong exactly. But here's what it misses. Somewhere around Series 2, the council's dealings with Clarkson stopped being ordinary planning admin and turned into something closer to a running feud. The farm shop got hit with a sourcing rule, one of the tightest restrictions of its kind ever slapped on a rural retail operation, by most accounts. Every application after that met the same wall, again and again, over years of committee meetings, and they kept going, objection after objection, refusal after refusal. Council members standing up at public meetings, cameras absolutely rolling, explaining in that careful, bureaucratic tone why the answer, again, was no. Now think about what a planning objection actually is, once you strip out the legal language. It's a story with a villain built in. Stakes. A little man standing up to an institution the audience has already decided is wrong before the meeting even starts. It's the exact shape television has spent 100 years learning how to sell. The council weren't writing scripts, nobody saying it was a conspiracy, but every letter arrived preloaded with drama, free of charge to the production. You couldn't hire a better antagonist if you tried. And Amazon's editors, whatever you think of them, are very good at their jobs. They didn't need to try hard at all. But of every refusal the council handed down over those years, one stands apart. And it's worth telling properly, because most coverage skates past the actual detail of it. Here's the one that mattered most. Not the sourcing radius, not the parking tweaks. The restaurant. Clarkson had a lambing shed on the farm, ordinary agricultural building, the sort you'd walk past without a second look. And the plan was to convert part of it A proper sit-down cafe with a working kitchen and serving area behind it, and enough extra parking laid on to actually support people turning up to eat there. Sensible enough, on the face of it. He already had the footfall. People were queuing for the farm shop in numbers nobody expected, and there was nowhere on site to sit down and have a hot meal. A 50-seat restaurant in a converted lambing shed with its own kitchen. That's not an outlandish ask for a working farm doing that kind of business. West Oxfordshire District Council said no. Not just no to the seating, no to the whole package, no to converting the shed, no to the kitchen and serving facilities that went with it, no to the extra parking that would have let the thing actually function without cars backed up onto the lane. And this is, out of everything the council knocked back over the years, the refusal people who follow this story point to as the real turning point, because it wasn't a tweak to an existing business. It was the thing that would have let Diddley Squat become somewhere people came to sit down, eat properly, and stay for an hour instead of grabbing a jar of chutney and driving off. The restaurant was refused, the shed stayed a shed, and the enforcement notices that followed, when a version of it opened anyway, became some of the most talked about scenes in the entire show, which is precisely why when the pub came along later, it landed the way it did. The farmer's dog wasn't just a pub Clarkson happened to buy, it was the sit-down restaurant the council had already told him he couldn't have on the farm, built instead legally, on a separate site, where none of those planning conditions applied. No sourcing radius, no shed to convert, no 50-seat cap, just a pub with a full licence and a car park big enough for anyone who wanted to come. The council refused a 50-seat restaurant in a lambing shed. What they got, a few years later, was a pub with 146 staff and 360 parking spaces, doing exactly what the restaurant would have done, at a scale the restaurant never could have reached. This is where it gets properly interesting, and where most coverage of the Clarkson empire stops thinking straight, because council bad farmer good is a lot easier to write than what actually happened. A planning refusal in normal English life is one of the dullest documents a human can produce. Paragraph after paragraph of policy references, subsection numbers, the phrase having regard to, doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting. Nobody reads them for fun. Solicitors read them because they're paid to. Councillors read them because it's Tuesday and it's the job. And yet somehow with a camera crew trailing the man it's aimed at, that same document becomes appointment viewing. Millions of people who've never once looked up what Class Q permitted development means will sit through 5 minutes of a man reading a rejection letter aloud in a muddy field, and they'll enjoy it more than half the drama on television that week. You've seen it if you watch the show. Clarkson standing in that field, letter in hand, reading out some clause about the character of the landscape, turning bureaucratic language into a joke that still gets you a bit annoyed on his behalf. It's a proper skill. Actually, most people handed a council refusal would just be furious and dull about it. He's furious and funny about it, which is a completely different thing, and it's the reason this footage travels the way it does. Nobody's laughing at planning law itself. They're laughing at the gap between how serious the document sounds and how small the thing is that it's actually stopping. A man wanting a 50-seat restaurant in a shed. A farmer wanting to sell his own lamb. Put those two things side by side. The tone of the letter and the size of the ask. And you've got comedy nobody had to write. Every time that gap widens, more people want to go see the place for themselves. And it compounds. One refusal is a scene. 10 refusals, spread across 3 or 4 series, is a running joke the whole audience is in on. The way a good sitcom builds a running joke, you don't need explained by season 3. You just know, the moment the council's name comes up again, roughly what's coming. Here's the bit that's genuinely counterintuitive, and worth sitting with properly rather than rushing past. Meant to hem in the farm shop, forced it to go out and build relationships with small producers scattered across 2 counties. Cheesemakers, beekeepers, small batch distillers, a woman doing chutneys out of her kitchen who'd never sold wholesale to anyone in her life. The kind of producers a normal retailer, free to buy wholesale from wherever's cheapest, would never have bothered finding, because why would you, when a lorry from a national supplier turns up on Tuesdays regardless? The restriction built the shop a supplier network no amount of money could have bought off the shelf, because that network only exists where somebody was forced to go looking for it, door to door. You can't buy provenance, you can only get forced into it. And once the pub's kitchen opened, that same network was sitting there, ready-made, waiting to go on the menu. The cheese, the honey, the beef, all of it with a name and a farm attached rather than a supplier code. The council thought they were closing doors. What they were actually doing, meeting after meeting, refusal after refusal, was writing the pub's origin story for it, one clause at a time, without ever once being asked. Picture a Tuesday. Nothing special about the date, that's rather the point. An ordinary autumn afternoon in Oxfordshire, the kind of light that makes the Cotswolds look like it's showing off. Low and gold across the fields, the sort of afternoon that makes you understand, for about 20 minutes, why people move out here and then spend the rest of their lives complaining about the broadband. A woman pulls into that 360-space car park, hasn't booked, knows somewhere in the back of her mind she probably should have. She'd read the reviews, she'd seen the queues mentioned more than once, and she thought about it for exactly as long as it takes to decide the drive was worth the risk anyway. Driven 40 minutes out of her way because the route looked nice on the map, and because, if she's honest, she'd heard things. Enough things from enough people that, we'll just turn up and see, felt like a reasonable plan rather than an obviously bad one. She waits, 40 minutes, leaning on her car, phone in hand, in a gravel car park in the English countryside, for a table at a pub she could have skipped entirely and eaten anywhere else in the county. There are a dozen decent pubs within 20 minutes of where she's standing, most of them with a free table right now. She doesn't leave. She checks the time, checks her phone again, has a look at the other people doing exactly the same thing around her and stays. Gets seated eventually. Orders the beef because of course she does. Tells 3 people about it the next morning at work. Completely unprompted. The way you tell people about a wedding that was better than you expected. Not because anyone asked, but because you genuinely want them to know it happened, and that you were there for it. She's not a marketing case study. Nobody paid her. Never posted a photo of a plate of food in her life. Wouldn't know how to work the filters if you asked her. She's just someone who chose, entirely of her own accord, to stand in a car park waiting for the chance to eat somewhere specific, instead of somewhere convenient, on an ordinary Tuesday that meant nothing to anyone except her. That right there is the whole commercial secret of this pub. Not the beef, not the beer. The 40 minutes she was willing to give up standing in a car park rather than drive somewhere easier. And no council in the history of English planning law has ever found a clause to regulate that. You can't legislate away wanting to be part of a story. Turns out you can only make people want it more by fighting it in public, in front of an audience who'd already decided, long before she ever pulled into that car park, exactly how this was supposed to end. Before we get to the numbers, and they're genuinely startling. If you like watching an institution accidentally do the exact opposite of what it set out to do, this is more or less what we do every week around here. So do hit subscribe, tap the bell so you catch the next one, drop a comment while you're at it, and a like helps more than you'd think. It's how these videos find people. Right, back to it. Let's talk scale, because this is where the story stops being charming and turns into an actual case study in how rural business works now. The pub employs somewhere around 146 people. Sit with that, 146 wages out of one Cotswolds pub in a part of the country where just finding staff has become the industry's quiet crisis. That's not a side project, that's a proper employer, in a region that's watched jobs like these vanish for a generation. The car park, that 360-space statement of intent, is full on weekends by most accounts, and decently busy midweek, which in pub economics is closer to a miracle than good management. The farm shop next door pulls something like 250,000 visitors a year, on an estimated 2 million in revenue, built entirely on produce sourced from within that 16-mile radius the council imposed to slow it down. And Hawkstone, the brewery that started life as a barley field Clarkson planted almost as an afterthought, is now valued around £75 million, growing at a rate that'd make most drinks executives nervous, and sitting on shelves in roughly 2,000 pubs across the country, this one included. Every part of that feeds every other part. The show sends people to the shop introduces them to the beer on the shelf at the pub sends them back for a proper pint at the place they've now seen on telly. Nothing in it depends entirely on any one piece surviving, and the pub, the one thing you can actually walk into, sit down in, feel part of for 90 minutes, is what ties the whole lot together in a way a TV contract or a supermarket shelf never could. Here's the part worth saying plainly, rather than politely. 146 wages isn't cheap. Hospitality margins in this country are being squeezed from every direction at once. Food costs, energy, national insurance, a constant shortage of people willing to do the work at all. Clarkson can fill that car park on a Saturday in July without trying. Whether he can fill it on a Wednesday in January, at margins that keep 146 people employed for the next 10 years, that's an honest, open question, and fame doesn't answer it on its own. There's a second question sitting under that one, and it's less discussed. Take the Amazon series away, and what's left is a beautifully done-up Cotswolds pub with an enormous car park. Good, probably profitable, but not a pilgrimage, not somewhere you drive 40 minutes to and wait, unbooked, for a table. The entire value of this place is bound up in that show continuing to exist, and what happens if it doesn't is something the people running Diddly Squat have almost certainly thought about a lot harder than anyone watching from home ever will. So, back to where we started. A council, doing what it believed was its job, spent 3 years trying to slow a man down, a sourcing radius. A restaurant refused outright, shared kitchen, parking, all of it. Enforcement notices more than once delivered while the cameras happened to be rolling. Every one of those decisions did the opposite of what it intended. The sourcing restriction built the supplier network that became the pub's whole provenance story. The restaurant refusal, the one meant to stop Diddly Squat becoming somewhere people sat down and stayed, is the exact reason the pub exists in the form it does. Bigger, freer, unencumbered by a single condition the council ever wrote. The enforcement notices became exactly the kind of institutional villain British audiences have always loved, watching get outmaneuvered by an underdog with a camera crew and a grievance. The council never once understood what they were actually up against. You can't regulate a feeling with a planning condition. Turns out you can only make people want that feeling more by fighting it in public, on television, for 3 years running. Every letter they sent was free content they never got paid for. Every objection was a reason to visit sooner rather than later. Right up until each series wrapped, they seemed to believe they held the leverage. In practice, they were writing the best advertising campaign this pub's ever had, for free, by accident, without noticing what they'd built until 360 parking spaces were routinely full and 146 people were drawing a wage from a pub that only exists in this form because a lambing shed conversion got turned down a few years earlier. That's not really a farming story. It's not even a pub story, if you think about it. It's a story about what happens when the people trying hardest to stop something haven't clocked that the audience decided whose side they're on long before the meeting even started. And that's the council that refused a 50-seat restaurant and ended up with a pub 10 times the size of it. If you've made that drive out to the Cotswolds yourself, booked or hopeful and unbooked like our friend in the car park, tell us how it went. We'd genuinely love to know. If you got something out of this one, there's a decent chance you'll like where we're headed next. So make sure you're subscribed with the bell on. Plenty more of these lined up. Thanks, as ever, for spending this time with us. See you in the next one.